Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. The night was dark and silent, with only the distant hum of the city outside to keep me company. I was alone in my apartment, nestled in the heart of the bustling city, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights filtering through my windows. But as I settled into bed, a strange noise broke the silence, echoing up from the depths of the basement below. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than the creaks and groans of an old building settling into the night. But as the minutes ticked by, the noise grew louder, more insistent, until I could no longer ignore it. With a sense of trepidation knotting in my stomach, I climbed out of bed and made my way down the stairs to investigate. The basement was dark and musty, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete. As I flicked on the light switch, I was greeted by the sight of empty boxes and forgotten belongings strewn haphazardly across the floor. But as I scanned the room, my heart skipped a beat as I caught sight of a shadowy figure lurking in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of old furniture. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that I was now alone. With a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins, I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the intruder's form. I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to survive this encounter. As I reached the top of the stairs, I made a split-second decision and darted into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer and prepared myself for whatever lay ahead. As I crept back towards the basement door, I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing up from below, growing louder with each passing second. With a deep breath, I flung open the door and charged down the stairs, ready to face whatever awaited me in the darkness. But as I reached the bottom, I was met with an empty room, the intruder nowhere to be seen. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that they must have slipped away in the chaos, leaving me alone once more. With a sense of relief washing over me, I made my way back upstairs and locked the basement door behind me, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in the silence of the night. But even as I settled back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, my senses on high alert, listening for any sign of the intruder's return. But as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I knew that I had survived the night, the danger passing as quickly as it had come. As the days passed, I tried to put the encounter behind me, chalking it up to nothing more than a trick of the mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me, lurking in the shadows just out of sight. And as I lay awake in bed each night, listening to the sounds of the city outside, I couldn't help but wonder if the intruder was still out there. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees and the rain pelting against the windows of my remote cabin in the woods. I huddled by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across the walls as I tried to ward off the chill that seeped in through the cracks. With each crash of thunder, my heart pounded in my chest, the darkness outside seeming to press in on all sides. I was alone, miles from the nearest town, with no one to turn to for help if things took a turn for the worse. As the hours passed, the power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking as I struggled to find it in the blackness. But as I swept the beam of light around the room, my heart skipped a beat as I caught sight of movement outside the window. A figure stood in the darkness, their silhouette illuminated by the flash of lightning that split the sky. With a surge of adrenaline, I rushed to the window and peered out into the night, my breath catching in my throat as I realized that I was now alone. The figure was gone, vanished into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. But as I turned away from the window, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there in the darkness, watching, waiting. With a shiver, I retreated to the safety of the fireplace, the flames offering the only source of warmth and light in the cabin. But no matter how hard I tried to push the thought from my mind, I couldn't escape the feeling of being hunted, of being prey in a game I didn't understand. As the night wore on, the storm raged outside, the wind howling and the rain pounding against the roof. I huddled by the fire, my senses on high alert, listening for any sign of danger. But as the hours passed, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on my eyelids, and I found myself drifting off to sleep despite my best efforts to stay awake. I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin, the noise echoing through the darkness like a distant drumbeat. With a jolt, I sat up, my heart racing as I strained to listen for any sign of the intruder's approach. But the footsteps grew fainter, fading away into the night until all that was left was the sound of the storm raging outside. With a sigh of relief, I realized that the danger had passed, at least for now. But as I settled back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there in the darkness, biding their time until the perfect moment to strike. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I knew that I had to leave the cabin and seek help before it was too late. With a sense of urgency, I packed my things and prepared to make a run for it, hoping that I could reach safety before the storm returned. But as I stepped outside, I froze in my tracks, my blood running cold as I caught sight of the figure standing in the clearing ahead. They were tall and shadowy, their features obscured by the darkness as they watched me with eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light. With a surge of fear, I turned and fled into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran for my life. Behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit, the footsteps echoing through the trees as my unknown assailant closed in. But I refused to give up, pushing myself to run faster, to keep moving forward no matter what. And as I emerged from the woods, I saw the lights of civilization ahead, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With one final burst of energy, I raced towards safety, the sounds of pursuit fading away behind me as I reached the safety of the town. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive, grateful to have escaped the darkness of the woods and the unknown terror that lurked within. I was home alone for the weekend while my parents were away, and I was looking forward to having the house to myself. It was a typical suburban house, with nothing out of the ordinary, and I felt safe and comfortable there. As the evening rolled around, I decided to relax in my room, scrolling through my phone and listening to music. Everything seemed normal until I received a text message from an unknown number. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a wrong number or a spam message. But then I read the contents of the message, and a chill ran down my spine. The message was simple but chilling. I'm watching you. I felt my heart race as I looked around my room, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Who could be sending me such a creepy message? And how did they know I was home alone? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and convince myself that it was just a prank. But then another message came through, this time more sinister than the last. I know you're alone. You should be scared. My hands were shaking as I typed out a response, demanding to know who was behind the messages. But there was no reply, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I felt a growing sense of dread as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just playing a harmless prank. They were actively threatening me, and I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I was receiving creepy text messages from an unknown number? It sounded ridiculous, and I didn't want to waste their time. Instead, I decided to barricade myself in my room, locking the door and pushing a heavy dresser in front of it. I felt a little safer knowing that I had taken some precautions, but the fear still gnawed at me. As the night wore on, I tried to distract myself by watching TV and reading a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house and every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. Then, just as I was starting to relax a little, another text message came through, this one more menacing than the last. "You can't hide from me. I'm coming for you." I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just trying to scare me. They were planning something far more sinister, and I was their target. I considered calling the police again, but I knew that I couldn't wait for them to arrive. I needed to get out of the house, to find somewhere safe where I could call for help. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and crept out into the hallway, trying to move as quietly as possible. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening in the stillness of the night, and I was sure that whoever was after me could hear every sound. I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the front door. But just as I was about to open it, I heard a noise behind me, a soft footstep that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unfeeling. I wanted to scream, to run as fast as I could and never look back. But fear held me rooted to the spot, and I could only watch in horror as the man stepped forward into the light. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing, before finally gathering the courage to run out the front door and into the safety of the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, where I pounded on the door until they answered. I must have looked a mess, my hair disheveled and my eyes white with fear, but they didn't ask any questions. They just let me in and called the police. The officers arrived a short time later, and I told them everything that had happened, from the chilling text messages to the mysterious figure in the shadows. They promised to investigate, but I could tell that they didn't take me seriously. In the end, they never found out who was behind the messages or what their intentions were. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never forget the terror of that night. I woke up to the sound of the lights flickering uncontrollably in my apartment. At first, I thought it was just a power surge, but as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up in bed, I realized that something wasn't right. With a sense of unease creeping over me, I climbed out of bed and made my way to the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest as I peered out into the darkness. That's when I saw it, a strange figure lurking in the shadows, their features obscured by the dim light from the flickering bulbs. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was now alone. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should I confront the intruder? Or should I call the police and wait for help to arrive? But as I stood frozen in the hallway, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing sense of dread. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator on the other end of the line. But as I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the figure was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Minutes passed like hours as I paced the hallway, my eyes darting nervously from side to side as I listened for any sign of movement outside my door. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway, growing louder and closer with each passing second. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that the figure was coming back, and this time, they weren't alone. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched frantically for a way out. But there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. And then, just as the footsteps reached my door, the lights flickered once more, plunging the hallway into darkness. With a sense of panic rising in my chest, I braced myself for the worst, ready to defend myself against whatever horrors lurked outside my door. But as the seconds ticked by and the darkness pressed in on all sides, I realized that the figure was gone, vanished into the night like a shadow in the wind. With a sigh of relief, I sank to the floor, my heart still racing as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. But as I sat there in the darkness, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night. I was home alone with my daughter in our rural farmhouse when we heard scratching sounds coming from the attic. It was late at night, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a branch scraping against the roof, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. With a sense of dread gnawing in my stomach, I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way up the creaky stairs to the attic. My daughter clung to my side, her small hand trembling in mine as we reached the top of the staircase. As I pushed open the attic door, the scratching sounds grew louder, echoing through the dusty space like the whisper of unseen hands. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the room, illuminating the shadows that danced along the walls. That's when I saw it, a small hole in the corner of the attic, just big enough for something to squeeze through. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached cautiously, my daughter clinging to me for dear life. With trembling hands, I reached out and shone the flashlight into the hole, expecting to find a nest of rats or some other vermin. But what I saw was far worse. Beyond the hole lay a hidden passage, its walls lined with crumbling brick and cobwebs. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we were now alone in the house. With a sense of urgency, I pulled my daughter close and hurried back down the stairs, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. What was lurking in the hidden passage? And how had it come to be in our home? As I tucked my daughter into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something sinister was lurking just out of sight. I stayed up for hours, listening to the sounds of the night, my heart pounding in my chest with every creak of the floorboards. But despite my best efforts to stay vigilant, exhaustion eventually caught up with me, and I drifted off to sleep, the events of the night still fresh in my mind. The next morning, I woke to find my daughter playing in the living room, her laughter echoing through the house like music to my ears. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. But as I made my way to the kitchen to start breakfast, I noticed something strange, a trail of muddy footprints leading from the attic door to the back door of the house. My heart sank as I realized that whatever had been in the attic had found a way out. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that we couldn't stay in the house any longer. I called the police and explained the situation, and they promised to send someone out to investigate. As we waited for help to arrive, I packed a few essentials and ushered my daughter into the car, desperate to put as much distance between us and the farmhouse as possible. Hours passed like days as we drove away from the house, the fear and uncertainty of the night still fresh in my mind. But as the sun began to set on the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, I knew that we had escaped whatever horror lurked within the walls of our home. And as we drove off into the distance, leaving the farmhouse behind us, I couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets lay hidden in the rural countryside. I recently graduated from college and moved into a new apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was a cozy place, perfect for starting my new life as a young professional. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, and I felt safe and comfortable in my new surroundings. One night, I was home alone, enjoying some peace and quiet after a long day at work. I was just settling down on the couch with a book when I heard a knock on the door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. Standing on the other side of the door was my neighbor, a middle-aged man who lived in the apartment next to mine. He looked disheveled and out of breath, like he had been running. He claimed that he needed help, that there was an emergency in his apartment and he didn't know what to do. He seemed genuinely distressed, and I felt sorry for him. Without thinking, I invited him inside, eager to lend a helping hand. But as soon as he stepped through the doorway, I knew that something was wrong. There was something off about his demeanor, something unsettling in the way he looked at me. It was like he was sizing me up, like he was trying to figure out if I was a threat. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease and led him into the living room, asking him what was wrong. But instead of answering, he just stood there, staring at me with a strange intensity. I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that I had made a mistake. This man wasn't here for help, he was here for something else entirely. But before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands reaching out to grab me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put some distance between us. But he was relentless, pursuing me through the apartment with a look of madness in his eyes. I knew that I needed to get out of there, to escape before it was too late. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I made a break for the door, praying that I could make it to safety. But just as I reached for the doorknob, he grabbed me from behind, his grip like iron around my arms. I struggled and fought, desperate to break free, but he was too strong. In a last-ditch effort to escape, I kicked out blindly, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and his grip loosened just enough for me to slip away. I raced out of the apartment, my heart pounding in my ears as I ran down the hallway and out into the night. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the street, where I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. I knew that I needed to call the police, to report what had happened and make sure that this man was brought to justice. But for now, all I could do was catch my breath and try to process the horror of what had just occurred. As I sat there on the sidewalk, shaking with fear and adrenaline, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. What was this man's motive, and why had he targeted me? But those questions would have to wait for another time. For now, all that mattered was that I was safe, that I had managed to get away from him before it was too late. I was home alone in my suburban house, enjoying the quiet solitude after the whirlwind of our wedding day. My husband had gone out of town for a business trip, leaving me to settle into our new home on my own. At first, I relished the chance to have some time to myself, but that all changed when I received a series of disturbing photographs in the mail. The first photograph arrived on a bright, sunny morning. It was a picture of me standing in the kitchen, making breakfast. At first, I dismissed it as a strange coincidence, but when the second photograph arrived later that day, I knew something was wrong. This time, the photograph showed me sitting on the couch, watching TV. It was taken from outside the window, and I could see the reflection of the camera in the glass. My heart raced as I realized that someone had been watching me, capturing my every move without my knowledge. I called the police, but without any evidence of who was sending the photographs, there was little they could do. I tried to go about my day as normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, another photograph arrived. This time, it showed me getting ready for bed, taken from inside the house. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that whoever was sending the photographs had been inside my home. I searched the house from top to bottom, but I found no sign of an intruder. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the eerie photographs as evidence of their presence. As the days passed, the photographs became more and more frequent. They showed me going about my daily routine, cooking, cleaning, sleeping, each one a reminder that someone was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I became paranoid, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows. I stopped leaving the house altogether, afraid of what might happen if I ventured outside. But no matter how careful I was, the photographs kept coming. Each one seemed to taunt me, mocking my attempts to uncover the identity of the person behind them. I reached out to friends and family for help, but no one had any answers. It was as if I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Then, one day, I received a final photograph. It was a close-up of my face, taken while I slept. The flash from the camera illuminated the darkness of the room, casting long shadows across the walls. I knew then that I had to confront whoever was behind the photographs, no matter the cost. With a sense of determination, I gathered my courage and ventured outside for the first time in weeks. As I made my way down the street, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. It was as if the eyes of the entire neighborhood were watching me, judging me for my perceived weakness. But I pushed through the fear, determined to uncover the truth. I knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, and searched for any clue that might lead me to the person responsible for the photographs. And then, just when I was about to give up hope, I found it a small, nondescript house at the end of the street. It was the last place I had expected to find answers, but something about it drew me in, compelling me to investigate further. I approached the house cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached out to knock on the door. But before I could make contact, it swung open, revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was my husband. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. How could he be behind the photographs? But as he explained, it all began to make sense. He had been struggling with mental health issues for months, feeling isolated and alone in our new home. The photographs were his way of reaching out, of trying to connect with me in his own twisted way. I was stunned, overwhelmed by a flood of conflicting emotions. Part of me was relieved to finally have an explanation for the strange occurrences, but another part of me was angry that he had kept this secret from me, angry that he had put me through such torment. But as we talked, I began to see things from his perspective. He was hurting, lost in a sea of darkness with no lifeline to cling to. And in his desperation, he had turned to the only thing he knew, me. In the end, we both realized that we needed help to heal, help to move forward, help to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, I knew that as long as we had each other, we could weather any storm that came our way. As we stood there in the doorway, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, and we were free to begin anew. It was a stormy night, and I was alone in my secluded cottage by the lake. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. I was just settling in for the night when the phone rang, breaking the silence with its shrill ringtone. I hesitated for a moment before answering, wondering who could be calling at this late hour. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly with apprehension. There was a frantic voice on the other end, barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Help me," the voice pleaded. "I'm in danger." My heart raced as I listened to the caller's desperate pleas. I could hear fear in their voice, a sense of urgency that sent a chill down my spine. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my own fear in check. "What's happening?" But before the caller could respond, the line went dead, leaving me with nothing but the sound of the storm raging outside. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. I paced back and forth in the dimly lit room, my mind racing with thoughts of who the caller could be and what kind of danger they were in. Should I call the police? Should I go out and look for them myself? But before I could make a decision, there was a knock at the door, so loud it sounded like it would break it down. My heart leaped into my throat as I approached cautiously, unsure of what I would find on the other side. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. Taking a deep breath, I slowly opened the door, ready to face whatever awaited me on the other side. But there was no one there. Just the howling wind and the driving rain, lashing against the porch with relentless fury. I stepped outside, scanning the area for any sign of the caller, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to go back inside, I heard a noise coming from the direction of the lake. It was faint at first, but as I strained to listen, it grew louder, the sound of someone calling for help. Without hesitation, I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way through the darkness. The rain soaked through my clothes, plastering my hair to my scalp and sending chills down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. I was left standing alone in the darkness, my senses on high alert as I searched for any sign of the caller. But there was nothing. No trace of the person who had called out for help, no indication of where they might have gone. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I returned to the safety of my cottage, my mind reeling with questions. Who had called me? Where were they now? And most importantly, were they safe? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me, telling myself that it was just a prank call or a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless sleep and anxious thoughts. I woke the next morning feeling drained and exhausted, the events of the previous night still fresh in my mind. As I sat down to breakfast, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat as I approached cautiously, unsure of who could be calling at this early hour. But when I opened the door, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. Standing on the doorstep was the caller from the night before, their eyes wide with fear and desperation. "I need your help," they said, their voice trembling with emotion. "Please, you're the only one who can save me." I didn't hesitate this time. I invited them inside, offering them a seat at the kitchen table as I listened to their story. They had been camping by the lake when the storm hit, they explained, and had become stranded in the woods with no way to call for help. I listened intently, my mind racing with thoughts of how I could help them. But as they spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. Vanished into thin air, leaving me alone once again with nothing but unanswered questions and a sense of unease that lingered long after they were gone. I never did find out what happened to the caller from that stormy night. But one thing was for certain, it was an encounter I would never forget. It was another late night at the office, and I found myself once again working alone in my apartment, surrounded by the glow of my computer screen. The deadlines were looming, and I was determined to finish the project before calling it a night. As I typed away at my keyboard, lost in my work, I suddenly heard a sound that made my blood run cold, footsteps coming from the hallway outside my door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as the footsteps grew louder, I knew that I couldn't ignore them any longer. With trembling hands, I got up from my desk and made my way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally mustering the courage to open it. But when I stepped into the hallway, there was no one there. I peered into the darkness, my eyes straining to see anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing. Just the empty hallway, bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. I closed the door behind me, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Maybe it was just a neighbor coming home late, or the sound of the wind rattling the windows. I tried to convince myself that there was a rational explanation for the footsteps, but deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I returned to my desk, trying to focus on my work, but the footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. It was as if they were following me, stalking me through the darkness of the night. I tried to drown out the noise with music, turning up the volume on my headphones until it was almost deafening. But no matter how loud I played it, the footsteps persisted, echoing through the empty apartment like a sinister drumbeat. I couldn't take it anymore. With a sense of dread knotting in my stomach, I made my way back to the door, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the hallway outside. But when I opened the door again, there was still no one there. I called out into the darkness, my voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. It was as if I was completely alone in the building, with no one to hear my cries for help. I slammed the door shut, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Or was there really someone out there, watching me from the shadows? I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that it was just my imagination getting the better of me. But deep down, I knew that there was something more sinister at play. The footsteps continued throughout the night, growing louder and more menacing with each passing hour. I tried to block them out, burying myself in my work and trying to pretend like everything was normal. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was lurking just beyond the walls of my apartment, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I was hearing footsteps in the hallway? That I thought someone was out to get me? They would never believe me. I was on my own, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I knew that I had to do something before it was too late. With a sense of determination, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and made my way back to the door. I didn't know what I would find on the other side, but I knew that I couldn't stay cooped up in my apartment any longer. As I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that sent shivers down my spine. I shone the flashlight down the corridor, illuminating the empty space with its harsh beam. And that's when I saw it, a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the reach of the light. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared back at the figure. And then, without warning, it vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness once again. I stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it tight. I didn't sleep a wink that night, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had seen and heard. But when morning finally came, the footsteps were gone, replaced by the sounds of the city coming to life outside my window. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. The footsteps were real, and so was the figure that had stalked me through the night. I worked a night shift at a local warehouse, and it's always a relief to finally get home after a long night of work. But one night, as I returned to my apartment exhausted and ready to collapse into bed, something happened that would haunt me for the rest of my days. As I settled into my routine of unwinding after work, I heard a faint tapping coming from the window. At first, I thought it was just the wind or a tree branch brushing against the glass. But as the tapping continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Reluctantly, I made my way over to the window and peered outside, expecting to see nothing more than an overactive imagination playing tricks on me. But what I saw chilled me to the bone. Standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the streetlight was a figure, tall and imposing, with empty eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that whoever, or whatever it was, they were watching me. For a moment, I was frozen in fear, unable to tear my gaze away from the figure outside my window. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I snapped out of my trance and quickly drew the curtains closed, hoping to shut out whatever lurked in the darkness. But even as I retreated to the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Who was that figure, and what did they want from me? I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As I lay in bed, trying in vain to push the encounter from my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains seemed to echo through the apartment, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. And as the night wore on, that feeling only grew stronger. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to find any semblance of peace or rest. Every noise outside my window sent my heart racing, and every shadow seemed to hold the promise of something sinister lurking just out of sight. Eventually, sheer exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a shroud. When I woke up the next morning, the events of the previous night seemed like a distant memory, a half-forgotten nightmare. But as I went about my day, the feeling of unease lingered, a constant reminder of the terror that had gripped me in the darkness. I tried to push the encounter to the back of my mind, to convince myself that it was just a one-time occurrence, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whoever, or whatever, had been watching me from the shadows that night was still out there, waiting and watching. From that day on, I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder and jumping at the slightest sound. I never saw the figure outside my window again, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before it returned. But no matter how terrified I was, I refused to let fear dictate my life. I took precautions to ensure my safety, installing security cameras and double-locking my doors at night. And slowly but surely, I began to reclaim a sense of normalcy, determined not to let the events of that night control me. In the end, I may never know who or what was watching me from the shadows that night. But one thing's for certain, I'll never forget the terror that gripped me in its icy embrace, and the knowledge that sometimes, the things that scare us the most are the things we can't see coming. It was a typical evening in my suburban home, and I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on my writing. The words were coming slowly, and I was growing frustrated with my lack of progress. But then, my phone buzzed with a notification, and I saw that I had received a new message. I didn't recognize the number, but when I opened the message, my blood ran cold. It was a threatening message from an anonymous sender, filled with violent threats and disturbing imagery. At first, I tried to brush it off as a prank, but as the messages continued to come in, I realized that this was no joke. Whoever was sending them knew intimate details about my life, things that no stranger could possibly know. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was being watched, that someone out there was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I tried to ignore the messages, to go about my daily routine as if nothing was wrong, but it was impossible to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As the days went by, the messages grew more frequent and more disturbing. They seemed to know my every move, my every thought, and it felt like there was no escape from their relentless onslaught. I tried to reach out to the authorities, but without any concrete evidence or proof of who was behind the messages, there was little they could do to help. I was on my own, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every unexpected noise. I installed security cameras around my house, hoping that they would catch a glimpse of my stalker in the act, but they remained frustratingly silent. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep for fear of what might happen next, I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It was faint at first, just a soft scraping sound, but it grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the sound echoing through the empty house. I knew that I should call the police, that I should try to escape while I still had the chance, but something held me back. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the door as the scraping grew closer and closer. And then, without warning, it stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press down on me like a weight. I lay there in the darkness, waiting for the inevitable, but nothing happened. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly, and still, there was no sign of my stalker. Eventually, exhausted from fear and anxiety, I mustered the courage to get out of bed and investigate. I crept downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest, and flicked on the lights. But the house was empty, just as it had been before. There was no sign of anyone or anything out of the ordinary, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my nerves on edge and my mind racing with fear. But when morning finally came, the sun streaming through the windows, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over, I told myself. The worst was behind me, and now I could finally move on with my life. It was a typical evening in my apartment, and I was sitting in my living room, practicing my guitar for an upcoming gig. The notes were flowing smoothly, and I was lost in the music when suddenly I heard something strange. At first, it was just a faint melody, barely audible over the sound of my playing. But as I listened closer, I realized that it was coming from the walls themselves, as if someone were playing a piano or a violin in the room next door. Confused and intrigued, I set down my guitar and got up to investigate. I followed the sound to the wall at the far end of the room, where it seemed to be the loudest, and pressed my ear against the plaster. Sure enough, the melody was coming from inside the wall, echoing softly in the confined space. It was eerie and unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next, but curiosity got the better of me, and I began to search for a way to access the hidden room. After a few minutes of careful exploration, I found a loose panel in the wall that I was able to pry open with some effort. Inside, I found myself staring into a small, dimly lit room filled with musical instruments of all kinds: pianos, violins, cellos, and more. It was like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. But what caught my attention the most was the figure standing in the center of the room, playing a haunting melody on a grand piano. It was translucent and ghostly, its features blurred and indistinct, but there was no mistaking the sound of its music. I stood frozen in shock and disbelief, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene before me. The figure seemed oblivious to my presence, lost in its own world as it played on, the music filling the room with an otherworldly beauty. But as the melody continued to play, I felt a growing sense of unease wash over me. There was something undeniably sinister about the whole situation, something that made my skin crawl and my heart race with fear. I knew that I should leave, that I should run as far away from that room as possible, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It was as if I were rooted to the spot, held captive by the ghostly figure and its hypnotic music. And then, suddenly, the figure stopped playing and turned to face me, its empty eyes boring into mine with a look of cold intensity. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent stare-down, and I felt a chill run down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness of the hidden room. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest, and scrambled to escape before it returned. I raced out of the room and back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me and leaning against it, gasping for breath. I didn't know what had just happened, or what the figure had wanted from me, but I knew that I never wanted to experience anything like it again. From that day on, I avoided the corner of my apartment like the plague, too afraid to even go near it for fear of what I might find. And though I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, a trick of the mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been all too real. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, the memory of that ghostly figure and its haunting melody continued to haunt me. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, while my dog, Max, lay at my feet, when I noticed something strange. He started growling low in his throat, his hackles raised, his eyes fixed on something in the corner of the room. I looked over, but there was nothing there, just an empty space by the bookshelf. I tried to reassure him, telling him it was okay, but he wouldn't stop growling, his teeth bared in a menacing snarl. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a sense of unease creeping over me as I realized that something was very wrong. Max wasn't the type to growl for no reason. He was usually the friendliest dog you could ever hope to meet. I got up from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest, and approached him cautiously. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. But he just continued to growl, his eyes never leaving the spot in the corner. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I tried to think of what could be causing his behavior. Maybe there was a mouse or a bug that I hadn't noticed, something that was agitating him without me realizing it. But then, suddenly, Max's growls turned into frantic barks, his body tensing as if he were preparing to attack. I took a step back, my pulse racing, as I watched him lunge at the empty space in the corner, snapping his jaws as if he were trying to catch something. I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls of the apartment, as I realized that there was nothing there, nothing that I could see, at least. But Max was still barking and snarling, his behavior becoming more and more erratic by the second. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest as I backed away from him, my mind racing with fear and confusion. What was happening? What was he seeing that I couldn't? And then, just as suddenly as it had started, Max's behavior stopped. He whimpered softly, his tail tucked between his legs, as he slunk back to his bed, his eyes wide with fear. I sank down onto the couch, my hands shaking, as I tried to process what had just happened. There was no logical explanation for it, no rational way to explain why my dog had suddenly turned on me like that. But as I sat there, trembling and alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the apartment, that there was something lurking in the shadows, something that Max could see but I couldn't. I spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, too afraid to move, too afraid to sleep. And though I never saw anything out of the ordinary again, the memory of that night haunted me for weeks to come. I was up late one night, as usual, sitting in my living room with a book in hand, the only light coming from the lamp beside me. Everything was quiet, just the way I liked it, until I heard a soft, barely audible whispering coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the product of too many horror movies and late nights spent alone. But as I listened closer, I realized that the whispers were real. They were coming from the vents, echoing through the walls of the house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as the whispers grew louder and more insistent. It was like 100 voices all talking at once, their words indistinct but filled with a sense of urgency that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to tell myself that it was just the wind or some other natural phenomenon, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something unnatural about those whispers, something that made my skin crawl and my blood run cold. I got up from the couch, my hands shaking, and crept over to the nearest vent, pressing my ear against it in an attempt to hear what was being said. But the whispers were still too faint, their words just barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. I stumbled back, my mind racing with fear and confusion, as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Who or what could be whispering to me from within the walls of my own home? I considered calling the police or a friend for help, but something held me back. I didn't want to sound crazy or paranoid, didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. So instead, I stayed where I was, listening to the whispers grow louder and more frantic with each passing moment. It was like they were trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't make out the words, couldn't decipher their meaning. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as I realized that I was completely alone in the house, with no one to turn to for help. Whatever was whispering to me from within the walls, I was on my own. I tried to block out the sound, to focus on anything else, but it was no use. The whispers filled my head, drowning out all other thoughts until I felt like I was going to scream. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of voices that had filled the air just moments before. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart still racing, waiting for the whispers to start up again. But they never did. I don't know how long I stood there in the darkness, listening to the sound of my own breathing, but eventually, I gathered the courage to move. I crept back to the couch, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. But the room was empty, just as it had been before. There was no sign of whatever or whoever had been whispering to me from within the walls. I never heard it again, but it still gives me chills to this day just to think about it. It was just like any other night. I had finished editing some photos from a shoot and decided to unwind in the comfort of my loft apartment. The soft glow of the city lights seeped through the windows, casting shadows on the exposed brick walls. As I made my way to the bathroom to freshen up before bed, something caught my eye, a small, black object tucked away in the corner near the ceiling. Curiosity piqued, I approached cautiously, reaching out to inspect it. My heart skipped a beat when I realized what it was, a camera. Hidden in plain sight, its lens pointed directly at the bathtub. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for any more of these devices. Sure enough, I found them. Hidden cameras strategically placed throughout my apartment, in the living room, the bedroom, even the kitchen. My sanctuary had been violated, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. Who could have done this? How long had they been watching me? Questions swirled in my mind as I grappled with the invasion of privacy. With trembling hands, I disconnected each camera, trying to regain a sense of control over my own space. But the damage had been done, the sense of security I once felt in my home shattered. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after removing the cameras. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye, sent shivers down my spine. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I lay awake, my mind racing with paranoia and fear. Who was behind this? Were they still watching me, even now? The next day, I reached out to the authorities, filing a report and installing security measures in an attempt to protect myself. But the sense of unease lingered, a constant reminder of the violation I had experienced. Days turned into weeks, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found myself avoiding certain rooms in my apartment, unable to escape the sense of paranoia that hung in the air like a thick fog. Then, one night, I heard it, a soft, staticky noise coming from the speakers of my television. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I realized what was happening. Someone was watching me. Through the very devices meant to keep me safe, they were taunting me, reminding me that they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. I felt sick to my stomach as I unplugged the television, cutting off the source of the intrusion. But the damage had been done, the feeling of being violated, of being exposed, lingered like a stain that couldn't be washed away. I tried to go about my life as usual, but the constant fear gnawed at me, eating away at my sense of security. I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down, for fear of what might happen if I did. Weeks turned into months, and still, the surveillance continued. I found myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, unable to escape the feeling of being watched, even in the most mundane moments of my daily life. Then, one day, I received a package in the mail, a small, nondescript box with no return address. Heart pounding, I hesitantly opened it, revealing a single, ominous message scrawled on a piece of paper inside. "You can't hide from me," it read. "I'm always watching." Terror gripped me as I realized that the nightmare was far from over. Whoever was behind this was still out there, still tormenting me, still waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I refused to be a victim. With a newfound sense of determination, I reached out to the authorities once again, vowing to put an end to the surveillance once and for all. It wasn't easy, but eventually, with the help of the police, I was able to track down the person responsible. A former acquaintance with a grudge, seeking revenge for some perceived slight. As they were taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, and I could reclaim my life, my privacy, my sanity. But the scars of the experience would linger long after the cameras were gone, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of my reality. I was in my apartment, just going about my business, cooking dinner like any other night. The sizzle of the pan and the aroma of spices filled the air, creating a cozy atmosphere. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected, and I couldn't imagine who it could be at this hour. Curiosity got the better of me, so I cautiously made my way to the door and peered through the peephole. There was no one there, just the empty hallway bathed in the dim light of the corridor. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should open the door or just ignore it. But before I could make up my mind, there was another knock, louder this time, more urgent. With a sense of unease gnawing at my gut, I reluctantly turned the handle and pulled the door open. And that's when I saw it, a small, nondescript package sitting on the welcome mat, with my name scrawled across the front in neat handwriting. There was no return address, no indication of who it could be from. My heart pounding in my chest, I quickly scooped up the package and closed the door behind me, feeling a sense of foreboding wash over me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just throw the package away without opening it. But my curiosity got the better of me, and with trembling hands, I tore open the wrapping. What I found inside made my blood run cold, a severed hand, pale and lifeless, staring up at me with vacant eyes. I recoiled in horror, dropping the package to the floor as if it were on fire. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick joke, or was it something far more sinister? Panic set in, and I scrambled to my feet, desperate to get away from the grisly sight before me. But as I turned to run, I heard a sound behind me, a soft, wet thud, like something heavy hitting the floor. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears, as I realized that I was now alone in the apartment. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest object I could find, a kitchen knife, and slowly turned to face whatever horror awaited me. But as I looked around the room, there was nothing there, just the eerie silence of the empty apartment. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my senses on high alert. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. With a sense of dread creeping over me, I made my way to the door, determined to get out of there as quickly as possible. But as I reached for the handle, I heard it again, that soft, wet thud, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, knife at the ready, but once again, there was nothing there. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before whatever was lurking in the darkness could find me. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and bolted into the hallway, the echo of my footsteps ringing in my ears as I raced down the corridor. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the street outside, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at the apartment building, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me out into the night. But the building stood silent and still, giving no indication of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. I stumbled down the street, my mind reeling with fear and confusion, wondering what could have driven someone to send me such a macabre package. And as I looked back at the apartment building one last time, I made a silent vow to never return, to leave behind whatever darkness lurked within those walls. In the end, I may never know who sent me that package or why. But one thing's for certain, I'll never forget the terror that gripped me in that moment, the fear of the unknown that lurked just beyond my doorstep. I was enjoying some quiet time in my backyard after a long day of tending to the garden. As I glanced over at the wooden fence surrounding my property, something caught my eye: strange symbols carved into the weathered wood. Curiosity piqued, I approached the fence, tracing the intricate lines with my fingers. They seemed ancient, almost otherworldly, and a shiver ran down my spine as I tried to decipher their meaning. With a sense of unease gnawing at me, I decided to investigate further. Grabbing a flashlight from the garage, I made my way to the spot where the symbols were carved, scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. To my surprise, I stumbled upon a hidden trapdoor concealed beneath a layer of overgrown grass. Heart pounding, I knelt down and pulled open the door, revealing a dark staircase descending into the earth below. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, I descended into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the inky blackness like a knife. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found myself standing in a small, dimly lit chamber. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I surveyed my surroundings. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange objects, talismans, ritualistic knives, and other occult artifacts. I felt a creeping sense of dread wash over me as I realized the significance of what I had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a hidden bunker, it was a shrine to some dark and ancient power. As I continued to explore, I came across a series of journals filled with cryptic writings and arcane rituals. The more I read, the more I realized the true nature of the bunker. It was a gateway to a world of dark secrets and danger. Suddenly, I heard a noise from somewhere deep within the bunker, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. Heart racing, I turned to flee, only to find my path blocked by a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a man, his eyes wild with madness, wielding a knife in one hand and a twisted grin on his face. I froze, my mind racing as I searched for a way out of this nightmare. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted past the man and sprinted up the stairs, the sound of his laughter echoing in my ears. I emerged into the cool night air, gasping for breath as I stumbled away from the bunker, my heart pounding in my chest. As I made my way back to the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. The world I thought I knew had been shattered, replaced by a dark and terrifying reality. But I refused to let fear consume me. With a newfound sense of determination, I reached out to the authorities, providing them with evidence of the bunker and the man who had threatened me. Weeks passed, and the man was apprehended, his twisted lair dismantled and destroyed. But the memories of that night still haunted me. I was alone in my cabin, just chillin' after a long day of fixin' cars. The night was quiet, only the sound of crickets outside. Suddenly, I heard it, a distant rumble of an engine. I peered out the window, trying to see what's up. Didn't expect to see a car coming down my driveway at this hour. My heart started racing when I saw a bunch of figures get out of the car. They were wearing masks, creepy ones. I didn't recognize them. Panic started crawling up my spine. What were they doing here? I had this gut feeling that something ain't right. I locked the door, but I could hear them outside, talking in low voices. They were up to no good. I could sense it. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but there was no signal. Figures. I was on my own. Then, they started banging on the door, demanding to be let in. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was gonna burst out of my chest. I was sweating bullets, trying to stay calm. I heard him talking about breaking in. My mind was spinning, trying to come up with a plan. I couldn't just sit there and wait for him to bust through the door. I remembered I had some tools in the garage, heavy stuff. I grabbed a wrench, holding onto it like my life depended on it. 'Cause it did. When they finally broke through the door, I was ready. Adrenaline was pumping through my veins as I swung that wrench, fighting for my life. It was chaos, fists flying, shouts echoing through the cabin. I managed to knock one of them down, but there were still more coming. They were relentless, like a pack of wolves. I was scared, but I wasn't gonna let him win. I fought like hell, every swing of that wrench fueled by fear and desperation. I could feel bruises form on my body, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Finally, I saw my chance and bolted for the door. I ran like I never ran before, heart pounding in my ears. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I made it to the woods, ducking and weaving through the trees like my life depended on it, 'cause it did. I didn't stop till I reached the main road, panting and gasping for breath. I didn't look back till I reached town. The cabin was far behind me, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I survived, but I'd never forget the terror of being hunted in my own home. I was at home, grading papers, when my phone rang. It was late, but I answered anyway. It was one of my students, Jack. He sounded angry, but I couldn't figure out why. He started yelling at me, saying I'd graded his paper unfairly. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. He kept going on and on, getting more and more aggressive. I started to feel uneasy, like there was something off about the whole situation. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. He knew where I lived. My heart started racing as he described my apartment in detail. I didn't know what to do. How did he find out where I lived? I felt like I was trapped, like there was nowhere safe for me to go. He kept threatening me, saying he was going to come over and teach me a lesson. I didn't know if he was serious or just messing with me, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I hung up the phone and locked all the doors and windows. I was scared out of my mind, trying to think of what to do next. I called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually showed up. I sat there in the dark, waiting and listening for any sign of him. Every little noise made my heart skip a beat. I was on edge, jumping at every sound. Then I heard it, footsteps outside my door. My blood ran cold as I realized he wasn't just bluffing. He was really coming for me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like a trapped animal, with nowhere to run. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, holding onto it like my life depended on it, 'cause it did. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I heard him looking. He was enjoying this, the sicko. I felt sick to my stomach, but I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I waited, listening to him pounding on the door and yelling threats. I was scared, but I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to fight for my life. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard sirens in the distance. The police were coming. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, but I didn't let my guard down. I stayed hidden until I heard them enter the building. Then I cautiously opened the door and peeked out. Jack was nowhere to be seen. The police searched the area, but they couldn't find him. They said he must have taken off when he heard the sirens. I was grateful to be alive, but I couldn't shake the fear that he might come back. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, too scared to go back to my apartment. But eventually, I had to face my fears and go back home. I changed the locks and installed security cameras, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every little noise made me jump, and I couldn't sleep without the lights on. I never found out what happened to Jack, but I hope he got the help he needed. As for me, I'll never forget the terror of that night, and I'll always be looking over my shoulder, afraid that he might come back for me. I was at home, just chilling in my penthouse, when I heard this loud crash. It came from the living room. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this cold chill run down my spine. I got up and went to check it out. I couldn't imagine what could have caused such a noise. But when I got to the living room, I saw it, my expensive artwork, all smashed to bits on the floor. I couldn't believe my eyes. Those paintings cost me a fortune. I was pissed, but then I saw it, a message written in blood on the wall. It said, "You're next." I felt my blood run cold as I read those words. My mind was racing, trying to figure out who could have done this. I was scared out of my mind, paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was being watched, like whoever did this was still here, lurking in the shadows. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, holding onto it like my life depended on it, 'cause it did. I started searching the apartment, trying to find any sign of the intruder. Every little noise made me jump, and my heart was racing so fast I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like I couldn't wake up. But there was no sign of anyone. It was like they disappeared into thin air. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in this nightmare with no way out. I called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any evidence. I was on my own. I stayed up all night, too scared to sleep. Every little creak of the floorboards made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little bit safer. But I couldn't shake the fear that whoever did this was still out there, waiting to strike again. I hired a security guard to patrol the building, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every little noise made me jump, and I couldn't relax for a second. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by fear. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't enjoy the finer things in life. All I could think about was that message on the wall, taunting me. But as the days went by and nothing else happened, I started to feel a little bit safer. Maybe it was just a sick prank, I thought. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone out there wanted me dead. I was at home, just chilling in my apartment, when I heard this weird sound. It sounded like a kid Logan. But I live alone, so I knew it couldn't be real. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the Logan kept going, getting louder and more unsettling with each passing moment. I felt this cold chill run down my spine as I realized something wasn't right. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going crazy, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I tried to ignore it, turning up the TV to drown out the sound. But no matter what I did, I could still hear it, that eerie laugh, echoing through the empty room next door. I knew I had to investigate, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, holding onto it like my life depended on it, 'cause it did. I crept into the empty room, heart pounding in my chest. It was dark and musty, with no sign of anyone or anything. But the Logan was still there, taunting me. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted reality. I wanted to scream, to run away and never look back. but I couldn't. I had to find out what was causing that laugh. I searched every inch of the room, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. It was like the Logan was coming from thin air. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to get out of there, to escape this nightmare and never look back. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the Logan stopped. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but I knew it wasn't over. I ran out of that room as fast as I could, slamming the door behind me. I felt like I was going to pass out, like I was on the verge of a breakdown. I called the landlord, demanding to know what was going on. But he just laughed it off, saying there was nothing to worry about. But I knew better. I knew there was something evil in that apartment, something that wanted to hurt me. I packed my bags and got the hell out of there, never looking back. I didn't care where I went, as long as it was far away from that place. I never found out what was causing that laugh, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I'll never be the same again. I was at home, just chilling in my suburban house, when I noticed something strange. All the clocks had stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. I thought it was weird, but I didn't pay it much mind at first. I tried to fix them, but no matter what I did, they wouldn't budge. It was like they were frozen in time. I felt this cold chill run down my spine as I realized something wasn't right. That's when I heard it, whispers echoing through the halls. They were soft at first, like a gentle breeze, but they grew louder and more unsettling with each passing moment. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something evil in my house. I felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes watching me from the shadows. I wanted to run, to get out of there and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. I felt like I was trapped in this nightmare with no way out. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and started searching the house, trying to find any sign of the source of those whispers. But there was no one there. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted reality. I wanted to scream, to run away and never look back. But I couldn't. I was stuck there, alone with those whispers echoing through the halls. I tried to block them out, but they wouldn't go away. They were like a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within my home. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to get out of there, to escape this nightmare and never look back. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the whispers stopped. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but I knew it wasn't over. I ran out of the house as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far away from there. I didn't care where I went, as long as it was far away from those whispers. I was home alone with my infant son, just relaxing in the living room, when I heard it, footsteps coming from the nursery. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this cold chill run down my spine. I rushed to investigate, fear clawing at my chest. The nursery was dark, with only the soft glow of the night light illuminating the room. But when I got there, I found the crib empty. Panic set in as I realized my son was gone. I felt like my world was crumbling around me, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I searched the room frantically, tears streaming down my face. But there was no sign of him. He was just gone. That's when I noticed it. The window was open, despite it being securely locked just moments before. My blood ran cold as I realized someone had taken him. I felt sick to my stomach, like I was gonna throw up. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to run outside and search for him. But I knew I had to stay calm, to think clearly. I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the numbers. I tried to explain what had happened, but I could barely get the words out. I was so scared, so helpless. I searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The police arrived soon after, but they couldn't find anything either. They said they'd do everything they could to find him, but I knew it was too late. He was gone, and I was left alone with this unbearable grief. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry out in agony. But I couldn't. I was numb, trapped in this never-ending nightmare. Days turned into weeks, but there was still no sign of him. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in this never-ending cycle of grief and despair. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard it, the sound of a baby crying. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed to investigate. I found him outside, in the arms of a stranger. Relief washed over me as I scooped him up, holding him close like I'd never let him go. The stranger explained that they found him abandoned in a nearby park. I didn't care about the details. All that mattered was that he was safe, that he was back in my arms where he belonged. I thanked the stranger profusely, tears streaming down my face. They said they were just glad they could help, then disappeared into the night. I held my son close, feeling like the luckiest person alive. I didn't know who had taken him, or why. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was that he was safe, and that we were together again. It was a regular night, just me and the flickering glow of the TV in my small townhouse. I'm a cop, so I've seen my fair share of creepy stuff, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I was just about to settle into bed when the police scanner on my nightstand crackled to life. There was a report of a break-in at my address. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my gun and badge, rushing out the door without a second thought. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every second that passed, my mind raced with possibilities. Who could be breaking into my house? Did they know I was a cop? Were they armed? When I finally pulled up to my townhouse, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I saw that the front door was wide open. I approached cautiously, gun drawn, ready for anything. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. I called out, but there was no response. My heart sank as I realized the intruder could still be here, hiding in the shadows. I flicked on the lights, illuminating the living room. That's when I saw him, a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. He was wearing a ski mask, his eyes gleaming with malice. Without hesitation, I ordered him to freeze, but he didn't move. Instead, he started to laugh, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. I demanded to know who he was and what he wanted, but he just kept laughing. It was like he was toying with me, enjoying my fear. As I edged closer, gun steady in my hand, the intruder suddenly lunged at me. We grappled on the floor, fighting for control. Adrenaline surged through me as I struggled to overpower him. In the midst of the chaos, I managed to get a good look at his face, and that's when I realized the truth. The intruder wasn't a stranger. He was someone I knew, someone from my past. His eyes bore into mine with a mixture of hatred and madness. He whispered my name, his voice dripping with venom. I couldn't believe it. How had he found me? How had he gotten into my house? The questions swirled in my mind as we continued to struggle. But even as fear threatened to consume me, I refused to give up. With a surge of strength, I managed to pin him down, holding him until backup arrived. When the other officers burst through the door, They found me kneeling on the floor, breathing heavily, my hands still clenched around the intruder's wrists. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. But as I looked into the eyes of the man who had tried to break me, I knew that the terror would linger long after the scars had healed.